It's an interesting circuit to be on, going around to schools and never knowing what's going to be there. You don't have a big theater next door, do you? So a lot of times I've gone to places like, Yale or Harvard or Princeton or something, and so you don't, well, there's some people here, and then you go out and you say goodbye to people, and then you get in the hallway, and then the doors open from the next reading, and about 2,000 students come out from the movie. But anyway, I really am very happy to be here, and it's a wonderful institution here, a wonderful school. This is my third venue here, I guess, in a row. We had a nice group in the morning. We had people from the larger community, and also in a good sharing. And then we had a class that's teaching on their main thing is various religions. And I'm a sociologist, basically. I'm a Franciscan, of course, and ordained as a Franciscan, and then I was sent to school to study sociology, and I got a degree from UCLA, which is a good school out in California. And the weather does have a little something to do with their large attendance, I think. Yeah. But anyway, I kind of, people my age, I'm 81, and people my age or somewhat near my age, we're not quite, well, we're Depression babies by birth, but, we were babies. And I grew up really in the beginning of the military or after the Civil War and First World War, Second World War. Then there's just the booming dimension of war in our life. And I'm, as a Franciscan, Francis started out his life wanting to go to war. He had all of the crusader wants to be knighthood and all of that kind of a mentality. And he just didn't have it for it. He couldn't make it. And so he ended up in a horrible war between Perugia and where he was from Assisi. And so he ended up as a prisoner of war. And it was a horrible experience for him. There were bloody wars, really bloody wars. And the streets were flooded with blood. I saw a dramatic Italian film. Of course, I guess almost all Italian films are pretty dramatic. And there was blood flowing in the streets and all of that. And so it was a pretty bloody war, but he was hoping to make knighthood. Anyway, he got captured, and his father was very wealthy, but hadn't gotten around to bailing him out yet, which is the usual way you got out of wars in those times. But he had a lot of that fervor for war. But I think what happened was that he became, becoming a prisoner of war, he really became very sick, and I actually put together the med books and so forth, and I really do believe that he had a very bad case of PTSD, and that his conversion and all his horror of fighting and all of that, but it matched very much with the kind of diseases of war, and then he went into this kind of spiritual experience, and that brings it up again. It's very similar. As he says, what was sweet to me became bitter, what was bitter became sweet. Basically, he was talking about, for example, he was a nice dapper young guy, and the lepers would come down the street, and he would, kick them off the street because they're not supposed to be there and all of that. And so that was very bitter to him. At the same time, he had party. Well, of course, that attracted me to the Franciscans. I'm not a Jesuit like my friend Steve here. I don't know, he's heard this talk 2 or 3 times, so he's probably not here now. But I think I saw him looking at a movie headline down the street, so that's probably where he is. And I told him it's a really good film called, I actually tell you the truth, we went to, what is it, Eat Well or something? Huh? Good Eats. And they had a sign there, and this is another out for you possibilities if you can sleep out of here, because between now and 9 o'clock they have open mic. So I thought, well, let's see if we have many people here. If not, I'm going to go back to the open mic. So maybe we'll all take a hit on this in about 15 minutes and just traipse over to open mic. But Francis really became very close to God, very close to God. And what became to him is this is not what life is about, that all the bravadeur that is, even as a young Italian with a French name would want. And he had it all. His father was a very wealthy merchant and indulged him in his pleasures. I have a cousin that married a guy that was like that. He was a ex-skier. So that's, I guess, anybody here that's an ex-skier? You go off a mountain, and I said, well, I'd just be afraid that I'd, fall and break a leg or something like that. And he says, oh, no. His mother said, no, you don't. When you go off those mountains, you either land on a cloud or sayonara. So Francis kind of was living that life, but he had a loving mother who took good care of him. And somehow the love of his mother, the love of God, and he had a very natural love of nature, and it pulled him through. And you'll find that very true if you work with people. I'm a veteran, and I spend a lot of time at the Veterans VA in San Francisco, and I see a lot of people with PTSD and the kinds of things, doing yoga, doing meditation, being out with nature and in the gardens and all of that. So Francis was into all those things, and of course he had a great love of animals as well. There's still a trace of that was hard to shake out in the days. I mean, this is the time of the Crusades, so even that far back, you didn't have to have the king or somebody draw straws and pick you out to go to war, but you would even have the Pope telling you, this is the call of God for you to go to war. So Francis kept trying and trying, but God never let go of him. And he changed in his whole interior. It wasn't just fear. He had not fear. He had an incredibly deep love, just in the tragedy that he experienced, and the horrendous people he had stabbed diving in his arms, and etc. He really became, repulsed with that, and he came to really love God, but in the constant loving of God, he shared God's love of others, of one another, and developed this. He was an intense lover, probably next to Jesus, and other, many great authors have said that. It's in Chesterton, that he became perhaps the greatest lover that ever existed in terms of a real altruistic love. And altruistic love sounds kind of, nice. But even Sigmund Freud said the highest kind of love is actually altruistic love, the love that loves the goodness in others. And Francis became that way. So he gave a great witness to people. But one of the things that just really disturbed him was we're talking about an age in which you moved out of the feudal culture, where people all lived within these big walls, whether they're the knights and their people, or whether it was the monasteries, etc., that people started moving into the cities. And so, whereas you have Benedict and others forming these big monastic enclosures and movements which had a great openness to God, but at the same time, Francis found it in the people on the streets. At night, he would go outside the walls and sleep there with the people. And he became so attracted to it that many of his friends that were repulsed at what he was starting to do here, the leader of the partiers was doing all this crazy stuff. And even St. Clare became a follower of Francis. She had to slip out of the house, sort of as he did too. And her uncles came on horses and knights and all to kidnap her and bring her back, but she just persisted. And so she followed Francis and many others, that it was not the glory and the way we see glory, but it was just this deep movement of heart. And we know now more and more from both science and theology even, about the energy that fills our universe. You know that we all have energy, but so does this table and water, and all of us in many ways are part of this incredible creation of which is an energy. What kind, I'm not so sure, but in the sense of that I'm a sociologist, I'm not a scientist, but I know some things about love, and from my experiences, but also from studying things and reading a lot, and the immense love that exists within us. And Joanna Macy talks a lot about this in Basic Systems and all that. She's a great writer, great thinker, great human being, and how the energy of love within us is always craving to go out to other sources that are there. And so as he began to recover, it was his attachment to nature, to animals and such, that emerged louder and louder. To music, he wrote the first poetry. There's many of you have probably heard of the little poem of Francis, "Lord, make me an instrument of your peace," etc. He didn't probably write it, but it was written at the time, actually at the end of the First World War, to get people to start loving again instead of killing. And so but he also wrote the most major of his works was the Canticle of Creation. And Francis was named by Pope John Paul VI. John Paul II. He was named at the request, actually, of non-Catholic scientists and so forth, was named the patron of ecology because of that, because he saw the relationships that exist in nature, that these were really relationships that we were all created to live in, that kind of intimacy out of which we were created, this energy that goes out into all of the universe. And so the incarnation then happened through Jesus coming, and incarnation brought back into the world of what the world was made. The incarnation, the presence of God, the presence of this intense love into the universe. And people just followed him. And he even said to Leo, who was his aide or whatever, the camp or whatever, and he says, "Leo, why is the whole world running after me?" He couldn't figure it out. But it was because he was exuding this love that exists in our universe, that we've got to, the more we can pull that together, and we can recreate in some ways the Garden of Eden, the way that this world was meant to live in love. That's the way we were created. The Pope, in his letter for New Year's, was quite interesting. He says, speaking of this horror of war, how do we get out of it? He writes a peace message every year. This was this one's first message. Seeing him kissing all the babies and everything when he was down in Argentina, it's not hard to believe. He was a pretty loving nono or something like that, out there somewhere. But he kissing all the babies and everything. But it's not a fixation, but it's the energy which the whole universe operates. Now, I talk about that in terms of that kind of energy as good. Some say, well, incarnation is from God, but I like it complicates it kind of if you say all energy is God, but I see all energy as something. It is something. It's this energy that holds us together and keeps us together and pulls us together, and that energy is good. Now, I speak of that as good, God. And I was giving a talk like this, and I saw this, I think it was a Monsignor or something sitting over here, and he was kind of frowning, what is all this paganism and, et cetera, et cetera. So I assured him that I said, I'm not changing God. I'm not violating it. I says, after all, I just speak of it as good, and that God, good. All I've done is, added a zero, and a zero is nothing. So I haven't in any way defiled the name of God, but it is. It's all of creation. All of us are part of a created world that ooze goodness and is attracted to each other. And as I said, even Freud, even though he says, okay, yeah, sure, sexual energies will pull people together in such very, very intimate ways. But he says, actually, at the highest level is altruistic love. That it's meeting not only over the attractive, but over the intimacy that's within us, over that energy that oozes from a mother, to the birth of a child, to relationships that we have in many ways, to somebody else who works in a hospital and helps people have more children. And we know wonderful stories, and we have them in so many people. I've been in some of the countries, but where there's so much horror and terrible, and here will be some sisters from Mother Teresa just holding the babies, as they're being born. Or a friend of mine, he's another Franciscan. He wanted to be here this weekend. We were here at another event, but he wanted to be here, and he talked about when we were invading in Iraq, and how the sisters of Mother Teresa had a place for little babies because their families were gone, and the only thing they could do was just be there and hold the babies. And Kathy Kelly, she's a wonderful person, and she tells how she was there with them and saw the children beginning to be filled with hatred. Saw pictures in the school that they had drawn. One had drawn of United States being bombed and bombed and bombed by their people, by Iraqis, and she said, "What is that all about?" And so he got the little boy together and said, "Well, they were cheering. What they were cheering was the federal building that was blown up by Peterson, and how so many people were killed, and they were cheering that, and he pointed out that there were women there. There was a nursery in the front of it. There were mothers there, and how do we love each other? How do we carry that on?" Well, anyway, our national priority, as far as our strategic planning and activities, is not so loving. I mean, it's basically we power through strength. So anyway, way back to here. I always keep forgetting to turn around and see the pictures. So Martin Luther King talks about love. It's only darkness. He was attacked one night. People came in threw a bomb in his house, and he said, "No." Everybody said, "Now we got to quit trying to talk about love, Rev. We got to get our guns and go." And he said, No. He said, "That's a darkness that closes in on us, and that's the end of it." I forgot you were the one with the switch here. Yeah, give me a sign once in a while. Okay, so but we find ourselves now pinned into wars and wars and wars. But how did we get there? Was it out of loving? Were we thinking about a lot of people in the world when we attacked back after 9/11? I don't know. I was so afraid when that happened, afraid that another plane would come and kill more people, but even more afraid that then we were going to put all our planes up and going to the places like Iraq and others, Iran, and the peoples of the world that we had all stigmatized. There was President Bush at the time used the expression after this terrorist attack that these were all there was an axis of evil running around, and that was what we ought to go after. And so right after the war, we started going after various cities in Iraq and Iran. So he came up with the expression, President Bush, an axis of war. But here they have wonderful. There's Louis here, who's a Persian. He's been to 2 of my talks today already, but he's Iranian, and he's a very loving guy. And he was many of his friends. I met with them in San Francisco right after 9/11, and it was 2002, and they were seeing how all these wars that had avenged were happening in Afghanistan, Iraq, and so forth, and ready to go in Iran. And so they came up with, they were talking about that in Iran the day after the war were all they put out these beautiful candles that they have, which they would use for, the most wonderful feasts and all that they have, and in support of the United States, to promote friendship with the United States, not this axis of evil that Bush had kind of outlined with all these different countries that we're still at war with. We're still almost at war with Iran, and we came very close with the present president over this question of Syria and the efforts then to also go and attack in Iran again. So I figured, well, how do you break through that? So a group of people, hold that a bit. So a few people came from Iran, and they were very. They got together and they said, we've got to do something to break that axis of evil. So we had big campaigns, and then we went to, some of us, a group sent by the International Fellowship, took people to Iran. It was hard to get in, but we did get in there. And the one in the middle is a Quaker, and he's really quite a guy. At 14, he was a student at Howard. He obviously does not represent the racial complex that was mainly prominent at that time at Howard, but they invited him to go with them down to the sit-ins in Washington. And he had, like, for example, he had one guy come in, and the guy says, hey, you white boy, you know, and he was a white boy himself, but he sticks a knife in his throat, and he says, if you don't get out of here, he says, I'm going to run this right down your throat. And David said, well, you know, you do what you got to do, but I'll still love you. I mean, that's the way he was raised. That's the way he lived. And he still does that. He goes all over the world. We were told by those who were escorting us around Tehran to not go out into parks and things. We could only go with them on certain places. And so we came out and we did go. And like we met this young man who was a student, sociology student at the nearby university. And they were having a rally and they were arresting people right over a few blocks away. And I said, well, we can share stories about that. I said, we've been arrested at a lot of universities and taken away by the police. So that's what we do. This lady in the middle is a Quaker, also from New York, and wonderful person, and was coming to do more good relations with Iran. And she was trying to get more people. Like Qom is the capital of really the religious centers of things there. And they have the finest teachers of the Quran and all that. And we have so many misconceptions of what the Quran is all about. But she studied with them, and if they had any indication that they were teaching people to kill people, she wouldn't have stayed there 3 minutes, because Quakers won't put up with that at all. And she was recruiting more people to come into Qom, which was where they worked on all the sacred books, Bibles and others, as well as the Quran, if they didn't talk of love. So this is a group of people that we also met going around, and they were local people. It was raining, and we were out in the rain with them, and they just started talking to us, and they had these flowers because they were going. This is the people at that time. We were talking about bombing pretty indiscriminately, and they were going. And okay, hold it here for just a minute. Joe, stay right there. Yeah. So they went around visiting people in hospitals and giving them flowers and all to the old people. So they had that one last beautiful yellow flower, which they gave to me, and I thought, well, they'd be so nice, but they were. And we invited them to come in to have some tea. Well, they had insisted on buying the tea for us, and then even paying to go back into the park. But it's a beautiful place, and there was a tomb of Hafiz there. Hafiz is a great poet, and they say every person has both the Bible and the Quran, and in fact, usually they have the Bible and the Quran. They have the Quran and Hafiz's writings, which they said really are what is on top of the Bible. Now, how many of us put other books on top of the Bible? Well, that happens. Anyway, then these guys looked a little rougher, though, and we were leaving, and so I had to relieve myself, as I did before we started here tonight, and so I went out. They sent me out in back of these big walls with which the great kings of Persia had been using for protection, because they insist that the Persians have never declared war on anybody, never started a war, but they will respond. And so that's their claim. And even if you look in the Bible, you will find that there are cases of where it was the Persian kings that sent the people out of exile back into their homeland, giving them all the gold and things to rebuild their temple and all of that. And so they have a very positive attitudes towards others, and they were eager to come and see me. I was there alone. This is the David in the middle, and he has, we love Iran or something like that, and they were kind of fascinated. But this crew, probably the average person had seen them getting on a plane, they would have been a little afraid to get on that plane, because they did look like, I was kidding Louis today, he was at 2 other talks and he isn't here. I said, wow, you Persians, everybody's afraid of you. Well, they aren't. And they come over to see us, and this was a wonderful occasion. Some of you might have heard of this. They had a trip sharing gifts of friendship with Miles for Peace. So this is a group of people who traveled all across the country on bicycles and meeting people, and they had just been there in San Francisco when we heard about them. And so then when we went over there, they invited us, and were really, really very, very constantly giving us presents and things like that. And they were very much caught up in this friendship, in this sense of love. David was bringing in all these discs and all that of things that they aren't able to get. They have more freedom than we think they do, but they don't have all the freedom that we think they do. We don't have all the freedom we think we do. But anyway, so then they kept inviting us to things, and they invited us to a gathering of people. This is called Messengers of Peace. So we're talking about them as being people of evil, but they see themselves really as messengers of peace. They run a peace school and language school, and that's how they bring people together to talk about the openness to peace and ways to peace. But they also took us to their parliament, and we would say, well, the people are nice people, but those are running the country, da-da-da-da-da-da-da. And they don't talk to each other, and can go back just a minute. And they were members. One was from representing the Jews, another the Palestinians, etc. Zoroastrians, which is the oldest Christian religion, Syrian Christians, old Christians, and they work very hard together to represent all of the people. Not all perfect, but that's very, very strong movements to do that. These are a Jewish person, and then we had a Christian young man in the back there. Oh, I think it's in a different picture. Anyway, so there was really hard effort towards peace. And we had these guides that were with us, showing us around. And yeah, they were very, very attached to their country, to their leaders, even to the Tola. And they still were very, 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 very friendly with us. But then we went to this site, and back in 1968, there was a war between Iran and Iraq, because we had actually supported Iraq to attack Iran, and we gave Iran mustard gas. It comes from not too far here from New England, where we have this huge storage of mustard gas, huge, huge. And this man in the wheelchair here, he had tears in his eyes when we went there that day, and his best friend had just died and it's been some years, but died of that war. And terrible things happened at that war, too. We had a ship over there, and our big job was while Iran and Iraq were fighting to keep the Straits of Hormuz open, because we wanted to be sure that the oil got through. Well, we had a new big cruiser there, and in that area, but it wasn't supposed to be in the Straits. It was too big. And yet they were trying to show they had this new system of radar and all of that. And they were supposed to be invulnerable. And the captain was proud to show off this beautiful ship that he had, and this very, very indomitable system of radar. So they were in the Straits, and there was a call that from the radar department saying that they saw a plane heading in their way. And so they said, well, well, what do we do about it? And the captain says, well, is it you know, a, a military plane? And he says, well, it looks like it. I can't tell for absolute sure. And he says, well, is it heading this way? And he said, yeah, it seems to be. And so he just gave orders to shoot it down. And there were like something like 168 passengers on it. And they took it down. And really, there's a ring that studied all this over there that had documented very well the whole situation on the ship and everything. And to the extent that they saw that the captain really was trying to probably get an award for this. And in fact, he did. And everyone that was on that ship got a medal for bravery and all that in protecting the ship. Well, 168 people on that plane just went into the Straits of Hormuz. And they showed us a beautiful picture that this wonderful photographer and filmmaker did of that whole event. And it's never been totally solved. We have never, ever asked an apology. So we took out the leader that they loved earlier on, and the U.S. brought the Shah back in, and that upset the way of the running of the country for a long time. Then we encouraged this war, and then we, shot down a passenger plane with 168 people and never apologized for it. So we say, well, well, what's the matter? What are they doing? They should be coming and, doing all these things for us. Well, okay. What do we do? What do we do, though? We can only respond not by avenging. You're never going to get peace with avenging, but only by turning, they can turn an enemy into a friend. Again, there's love. So we need to think about that. We need to reflect on that. What does that really mean? What can we do? Well, that was our way of doing it, to go, and it took a lot of energy and effort and time and money even, to go and make these relationships. But it was such a bringing together of a lot of people. And that's happening all over the world. I mean, it really was they said a lot of the things towards the end of the Vietnam War were done by people, in various cities. Women got together and got groups that went over, over there to North Korea. I mean, there were some people that went to Korea, and also people that went to North Vietnam that made these kind of connections. And we were really finding them reaching out to us in an incredible way. And so that's what we feel, that, it's only through love can you overcome these things. I was in jail, I've been in jail a fair amount, and a couple hundred times, but my friend Steve, you should talk to him afterwards. He's been in for years and years, and it's not out of hatred, and it's not out of robbing stores or killing people, but it's out of really trying to create a world of peace. That's the only thing that will do it. That's the only things that will do it. And I mentioned that how many of the people are trying to bring people together, but it's hard to do. So even getting permission for people to come and go and do these things. But it's really, really important. I think it's so important that it should be very high on in the academic world. So many people, how many here have done any kind of going to another country or among people of a different language or something as you've gone through your education from, I don't know, kindergarten up? How many people have gone to different countries? It can be a summer vacation or it can be a longer time, but I think it's so important. Or taking people in. I always think it's wonderful when people can come and live with others. And there's so many cases that I know of where people, regularly do that. Will bring families in and take them in, and it changes the world and the love of a world. So I really appreciate that kind of thing. I was a pastor in San Francisco for about 20 years. And it's a pretty alienated neighborhood, although wonderful San Francisco. I left my heart in San Francisco, all that sort of stuff. But really people that come together there have found ways to kind of negotiate in a lot of ways. That part of it's because it's very tightly congested, and so you'd be in an apartment building, but it's pretty hard to isolate yourself very much. And so people do have, then they have, of course, the Patrick's Day Parade and the Gay Pride Parade, and they have every kind of getting together, and very many ethnic groups, and it's a wonderful way of becoming one people. So we have spent a lot of efforts. We had a lot of homeless people there, and they were very isolated, and yet they're constantly swept off the streets. Well, tourists come, and it won't look good, if we have tourists, and they see all this garbage lying around. Well, we started taking people in at night off the streets, where it's not as cold as here, but it's still cold. And then we had to move beyond that to taking them in during the day, because so many are out on the street all night. And I'd open the door for Mass in the morning, and they'd be full of hypothermia, and said, well, come in. We had spent over $1 million having to earthquake-proof our church. And I said, and how many people go there during the day? Very few. And yet God's children are all lying out there dying on the streets. So we opened up, and it was surprising how a lot of people were objecting. Even Mother Teresa's sister said, oh, that doesn't look very good. Those people, they smell, or they this or that. They won't even let them in the library because they smell. Well, we made an agreement with them that they said, well, if they're 6 feet away you can smell them 6 feet away. We can throw them out. I said, well, we'll come only if you call us first, and we come and give it a smell test, odor test, or something. Sure, you don't want to make it impossible for other people to use, but we are all here to share what we've got. So this is the kind of rallies we have. We've gone through this a lot of times, getting arrested on the streets. So now I see, well, what happened to me one time is, it goes along with the story about bringing these people in to stay in our church, and that was because I had gone flying a lot. Well, people might let some of them come in, but they would never let them lie down, and some of these people are half dead when they come in after all night on the streets. And so I started letting them in, and people said, oh, that's not right, you can't do that. And I said, well, look at all the money we got for this church, and we have, how many days of the week do we really use it, So we started doing that. We call it the Gubbio Project. It's the story of St. Francis. Anybody know of the Wolf of Gubbio? You ever heard of the Wolf of Gubbio? Yeah, he knows about the Wolf of Gubbio. There's a town called Gubbio, and Francis came along, and he saw all these people frightened and screaming, Francis, don't go near there, Francis, that wolf's going to eat you up. And he said, what makes you think that? Well, he's dangerous. So Francis said, well, what's the matter, brother? What are you doing that for? And the wolf says, well, because I'm hungry. And he says, well, if they feed you, would you, help them? And so forth. So they protected him and feed him. And so Francis learned how to kind of negotiate. So we call it the Gubbio Project. The people agree to keep up the church, keep it clean, because it wasn't always. And sometimes there were things in there that were kind of dangerous. And it's a wonderful project, but it's hard. We've tried to spread it to other churches, and they don't take to it too quickly. And but it's really, really a wonderful ways. There's so many ways people are bringing people into their homes, or from other countries, or and that's what makes it a good church, a work church. And then we have to think of our elderly people that like myself, over 80, and there I am. But I know I like that picture because I was when I got part of this idea, I was flying across the country, the Campaign for Human Development, the Catholic Church's response to poverty. I was on the first committee of that about almost 30 years ago, and to help the poor. And so I was going to a meeting in Denver, and the only way I could get a cheap ticket was to get in at midnight and spend the night in the airport. And I found a chapel, so I went in and laid down to go to sleep, and then I saw there was a sign, no sleeping or lying down on the benches. And so I had a little come to meeting with Jesus. I said, Jesus, do you really mind? I'm really tired. I'm going to do good if I get to New York and can help with this meeting and be awake. So he said, no, I don't mind. So I started, sleeping on the benches. Well, then when I got back and we started talking about this project in the church, people were kind of complaining. I said, well, my gosh, if Jesus said it was okay for me to sleep in the church, I hadn't been out all night freezing to death, you know. So we just have to be one people. Oh, that was another guy that was upset with me for. So now another thing is that we're always increasing our ability to hate and to kill. And the biggest thing now, and the president is really big on them, is I spent a lot of years after the Vietnam War trying to stop these nuclear bombs from being tested in Nevada and developing new nuclear bombs. So we were out in that area in the desert north of Las Vegas, and then I saw these really funny looking planes. Yeah, there's one more. Yeah, these are Reapers and the Reaper. We call it the Grim Reaper. We came up with it, hunter-killer drones. What a way is that to face the world around us, you know? We can look at some of these things as also, some of the things I showed you are signs of people coming together. But there's also these, you know, what a name to give. You send your kids to go to school, and then some people end up getting convinced to come into the military, as I did, and it was through ROTC, but we flew in planes like this, but at least we were in them. These are drones. There's two people within them. One is a pilot that flew regular planes, and then some are just out of school, and so they started, they trained to use radar in a different way. They're right there across the highway there, a little bit north of Las Vegas. They had all these trailers, and they were sitting in these trailers, and they had one qualification for they didn't go through, you know, med school or anything. They had one qualification to be able. The one pilot, he knew a lot from handling the stick and all that, but the other person handled like the laser stuff and so forth. They call him a sonar operator. And what do you think was his qualification to know how to guide these things? Anybody have any idea how they could just sit in the cockpit and start handling a plane that was thousands of miles away, and they were handling a plane? How do you think they knew how to do that? Yeah, Andy? Video games. Even in the Marine Corps, I talked to a general. He said, I trained all the guys going into war in the Vietnam War and all that, and he said, hardly any of them would ever fire a gun. But he says, not since the videos. He says, it's just more scores up there, you know, more scores. You think about that. Those of you who operate video games, you know, what are you thinking about when you're racking up all these points? I mean, you're actually deafening yourself to, in a certain way, muting, you know, to the kind of damage these things are meant to do. And it's horrible that people have gone over there. A friend of mine held this baby, saw his mother holding this baby that was hit by a drone, and the baby was screaming, and they didn't have anything. They didn't have any antiseptic, anything. And there's only one. You know what an antiseptic is in a hospital like that? And you've got a baby crying like that. What is the antiseptic they have? You know, to gel it for them? A mother holding her baby. It's the only thing they have is a mother holding the baby. And the mothers of St. Teresa were over there, Sister Teresa over there, and that's what they did. That's all they could do. So anyway, reaching out to people, and yet we put these no trespassing signs so that we can do really what's evil. Here we were, this is the place, the base in Creech. It's the headquarters for all of the drones. Through these gates pass America's finest warriors. That sounds a little, you know, what? And then bombing houses, and there's a lot going on in Congress and all about how many houses have been taken out and so forth. So anyway, that's kind of the pinch that we have, is that how do we open our love, meeting people, knowing people. That trip for me, I've been to a number of those places, and always good experiences. I don't even know what this picture is over here. There's people on the street, I guess. On the bridge, maybe we're going to jump off. So anyway, that's kind of just a little illustration of growing in that kind of love. One more, that's one of those neat little caps I got in prison. I managed to sneak it out. I think there's one from the, yeah. Oh yeah, we had this one about 2 feet in love in action. So we have charitable works, but we also have to have love work, social justice work. Social justice, charity, they all have to come together. And that's what we want to do. as Catholics, but as Christians, as human beings. So helping with housing and all these things. And so one of the things that we started, we had people sleeping on the street, and I've mentioned this, we brought them in and let them sleep in this beautiful, beautiful church. And people said, no, that's wrong, that's wrong. He says, no, these people have been out all night and they're freezing, and God gave us the ability to redo this church, so let's take care of the people that are there. So you see them, it's beautiful. I have a film that's a short film if we had time to show it, but showing these people that have just, they'll tell their story about how they couldn't get a job or anything, and so they were doing well, and then so many people got laid off. I mean, with this last recession, there's still millions of people laid off. So how do we reach out to each other? Well, Francis reached out to the wolf, and that's how he broke down the alienation there, and that's what we do. And so we call upon St. Francis here in the school. It has sort of that as a special patron, but we call out to each other. How do we learn to truly love each other? And I really believe that I've committed to love everyone, but people will hurt me because people have been hurt. So we do what we can to cover it up. So I love every one of you, every single one of you. And where's Louis? He isn't here. Tell him I love him, because I met him just this morning. Well, we were both named Louis, so right away he became like my another grandson. So bless you all, and thank you for coming. And I know you're a really loving group of people, and I love the school because it's based on that. And bless you all. Okay. Oh, questions. I never remember to give time for questions. You want to take a few? How about anybody have a few questions?
If you have a question, go ahead. Raise your hand. I'll bring the mic around to you. Brian will kind of also try and spot you. So
you can lead if you need to leave, but stay around and ask a few questions.
And if you are here from Professor Davidson's class, please stick around, and Brian and I will sign you in.
What?
I think it's wonderful, the work that you're doing, and
just what I wanted to hear. I can go home now.
Well, But the question is, how can the peace-loving people of the world make a connection or really influence the governments of the world? I mean, because even as you were talking about, going to Iran and this peace mission, the country of Iran is building nuclear weapons, and of course we know the things the United States are doing. So how optimistic are you that the grassroots movement of people will impact governments?
Well, one of the things to start with is we actually don't know that Iran are making nuclear weapons. We do know that the United States is making massive amount of weapons. And I just came here, and my brother Steve just came here from Oak Ridge in Tennessee, where they make the cores of all the bombs. And it's the wildest place of nuclear weapons in the world. And we're even there disassembling some of the Russian ones, but it's not getting rid of them, it's making more. So, Sister Megan, she got people together, a couple of young guys. She's older than I am by about 5 years, 86 or something. And they got some little clippers and went through some barbed wire fence and went to this big building. And there were wires and things, but they somehow never stopped them. And they got to this building, tagged it, they took some spray paint, no more drones and things like that, no bombing. And so they finally got arrested, but they shut down their production because they had to check on their security. And so now we went there yesterday. They were found guilty of sabotage, and nobody can imagine. This little sister who's been all these years, even in Africa, helping people. Yeah, sure. So now they're facing maybe 30 years in prison, something like that. They were at the trial yesterday, day before yesterday. The judge was just getting to the point of giving him a sentence, and they had all these wonderful testimonies, but he was squiggling in his seat, and he said, oh, it's snowing outside. We're adjourning for another month or something like that. So people are doing what they can do, and I think but I think it starts that's why I love to see it happening in schools and even among small kids. They're naturally created to love and help to learn what that means. Different things we can do in different ways. There's so much goes on the internet. Bill Moyer says that. He said, will we ever find peace? And he says, if it's going to come, it's probably going to come. Like through the internet, how many people? I was listening to the radio one day in San Francisco, And it was really touching because this young man, it's youth radio and public radio, and I heard him talking, and all of a sudden his voice is getting higher and higher. Oh my God, and he's connecting with this girl over, I forget now where, it was one of the pretty dangerous areas. And he said, oh my God, they said they're coming across her lawn. And then the whole thing went dead. It was obviously somebody attacking that house. But I mean, the fact that he could feel that so strongly, that it touched him so much. And that happens a lot when you see these things. That television will bring us that and show us, the pain that goes on in our world. Well, that should touch our heart. A lot of times I do these kind of long fasts where there's a war zone or something like that. And like for Guantanamo, I do that sometimes now, to try to let those people out of Guantanamo. They've been there for so long now. The president has again said he's going to let them out, so we hope so, but back to their families and all that. But, how do we express ourselves to them? And that's a way that people communicate and learn more about others and realize we're all people. Yes?
We had a question back here about, have you been arrested for the same thing every single time, or were there different charges?
No. Yeah, I have a few hundred times, but a lot, because I mentioned earlier that we were trying to stop the testing of nuclear bombs, because we were making so many nuclear bombs. We said, how do you stop them, and so we found out that they can't create new nuclear bombs without giving tests. And we went out to the sites where they are and got arrested there. And I got arrested there 200 or 300 times at the same place. And then I moved to another place. Like I've been going a number of times. I was in prison near Vandenberg Air Force Base over in the California coast. And right there, it was where they had a lot of nuclear bombs. And they bring them in from the farmlands where they have them on guard. And so we've been trying to stop them from shooting them off, because they take the warhead out, but they put depleted uranium in, and then they fire them off from Vandenberg, which is a military base, and they send IBMs out and then other things into space. But they land then right out. And Kwajalein is actually where, in the Marshall Islands, is where they tested the H-bomb. So already, after all these years, these people are still dying from the radiation of the H-bomb. And but they send these out deliberately, because they said, well, they're testing them for safety and reliability, meaning they're testing them that when they set it off, it won't blow up on them, but when it gets over there, it will. So, we're trying to, stop that. So we go when they're having tests, and we tried to or sending those off, and we try to get to them and tell the commander to stop doing it, and et cetera, et cetera. So there's a lot of different things that I've gotten arrested for, I must say. I don't think some of the things people say, I get arrested, I don't get arrested. Just because I'm a priest doesn't mean I get arrested for, what. So anyway, there are a lot of things people get arrested for. Little old ladies, well, Sister Megan's, as I say, she can be 80, she was 84 yesterday, day before. And there she is, ready to go for another 10 years. And some proportions, they just say, well, how you do that, can you last another 10 years in prisons? She says, oh my, she says, oh, to have another 10 years in prisons just to serve these wonderful people. She was helping all these people. There were a lot of young mothers and all that were away from their children, and she could help them and help get aid for them and get phone calls for them and stuff like that. So there's a lot of things we can do, but that's what we got to do. Anybody else?
Raise your hand if you got questions.
Or remarks. It doesn't have to be a question. You can say, that's a bunch of hooey. Well, anyway, thank you all. And oh, you have a question?
I have a question.
Oh.
I'm just curious about, the stance you were taking. How is this received in Rome? You're pretty disobedient, you're in trouble a lot, and you may be expensive to the attorney and all that. I mean, how does
That's okay. Just.
how does Rome view how does Rome view this behavior of yours?
Well, it depends. And my friend Steve, Brother Steve, you wanted to ask him some questions. He's way up in the corner there, and he spent a lot more times in prison, a lot of time more than me, many more years, months. But, almost anything has a cost or is misunderstood at some point, whatever you have. I mean, I guess we have a lot of Catholic mothers here, and you know, it was a time when just because a Catholic mother had, you know, 3 children, my mother had 3 children, and that was by many people considered, how can you do that and have all those children, and da 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 da. And so somebody else doesn't have many children, and then, well, how did you do that, and et cetera, et cetera. So I mean, whatever you do, you can be criticized, but no, I've never had any serious trouble. You know, I've had some trouble. Mostly it's things like I wanted to go to Korea, where they're building, South Korea, they're building this huge missile base for all planes, everything in there, and ships. Horrible, horrible, horrible. And they're building, the U.S. is building this huge missile base there. And so a delegation, a priest, Jesuit, I'm Franciscan, he went there at 80-some years old with a very bad heart. And how he made it there and back, nobody knows, but he did. But he made it. So, and he went to prison for at least a relatively short trip on one of those. So it's you know, I've had some, but not really seriously. We go to the School of the Americas a lot. Some of you heard of the School of the Americas down in Georgia, where they, huh? The new name is, yeah, no, yeah. I haven't gone there the last couple of years because I've been so busy in Washington, but it's WinSec. Well, it's yeah, and it's just a cover, but a lot of people have gone there and witnessed, and so we have too. Yeah, I know. That's wonderful. That's wonderful. I went with a group from Wilson High School College too, near here. Yes, that's right. Yeah. Okay, I can. It sounds like this young man can do it and will be here longer. But I have been arrested there a number of times. School of the Americas it goes way back to our relationships with Latin America. Now, we talk about we build bombs and we attack people, and et cetera, but that's this whole question of what is our basic strategy definition here? Now, you know so many things, Andy. What is the basic strategy definition for the United States at this time? How would you describe it in just a word or two? Or for a while, it was MAD. You know what that is? MAD. Huh? Mutually assured destruction. That was actually the definition of our strategy plan. In other words, that we would be able to completely destroy anybody who got in our way at all. And that meant mostly around oil. And actually it was President Carter who came up with Directive 59, which said that we would go to war to protect our interests anywhere in the world. And so they asked at the White House, does he mean even nuclear war? And he said yes. They said yes. And and then they admitted it was basically our interest was the oil interest. In other words, to be sure we got most of the oil, we would even be willing to go to war. And that's how we ended up with that situation in the Hormuz Straits, where we were trying to get all the oil coming out of there. And when there's a scuffle going between Iran and Iraq, we wanted to be sure we were on the side with the oil. So there are all those kind of things that go on. Well, anyway, the big thing was to try to enlist these other countries, of course, to be on our side. Like we helped Iraq at one time, and then Iran, and then this and that. And we have great connections with so many people down in the South, down in South America, Latin America. And we were training them down there. We had a school down there in Panama. Well, it got to be too much. So they actually brought it up to here, into Georgia, and they put a training school. Now they found, and I was quite involved in this, and they found in a place called Fort Huachuca in south of Tucson, they had a big school. It's a government intelligence school. They had a big school there, and they published books that finally one of the Kennedys in Congress was able to get a hold of them and brought them to Congress. and they were clear drawings of torture, clear drawings of torture. I know someone that I know quite well, and he was an interrogator, that how do they get the information from them? And he said, well, I wouldn't say that we tortured them, you know, but we would just get them and say, okay, you know, if you don't give us this information, we will fly you out to, you know, Syria or someplace where you will be tortured, and so will your family, and et cetera, et cetera. I mean, that was the kind of, he says, and we do it, you know. This is, so that's why the School of the Americas is, we are not the School of the Americas. We don't represent the School of the Americas. We represent SOA, School of the Americas Watch. So we're trying to watch what they're doing, especially when they change their name. We decided we had to watch them even more closely. But there have been people working on it. It's come very close to being closed by the Congress, but not close enough. So that's one, yeah. Anything else? Here's your chance. Speak now or forever hold your peace, and I'll be back tomorrow morning. No. Okay, well, thank you very, very much, and really delightful to have you here. And you have 40 minutes. If you want some real entertainment, you can run over to each place and get on the radio.